The question in these circumstances really is, what do you do? And as I said, it's enough. We know that Congress is going to fiddle, and I'm glad that all of us are in this room as activists ready to push people and Congress to the wall to say, look, it's time. It's time to impeach this president. It's there. You've got to do it. It's time to end the war, end torture, and end warrantless wiretapping. You know, when we wrote this book, it's actually the first book out, Articles of Impeachment Against George W. Bush. And, you know, everybody thought, oh, you know, that's not possible. It's not going to happen. It's not there. And when you look into the Articles of Impeachment, and as was said, impeachment requires high crimes and misdemeanors. Doesn't mean that they're crimes. In the 14th and 15th century, when those terms were bandied about, it means subversion of the Constitution, subversion of government. It means basically, essentially, in some way what the Congress says, but it actually has the meaning that not carrying out what the president is supposed to do as the president and subverting the Constitution of the United States. And I was saying in the last few days, there's not an issue about whether there are high crimes and misdemeanors here. As I said on a radio show the other day, it's a slam dunk. If someone argues with you about that issue, that's not the issue to argue about. They can argue with you about whether it's possible, but there's no question that this president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. And they've been named, I'll name them again, the Iraq War in two incredible, or maybe more ways. One is obviously the lies to the American public that got us into the war, the lies to Congress that subverted Congress's right to declare war by going in and saying there's weapons of mass destruction, it's related to Al-Qaeda, it's related to terrorism, we have to do this. Clear lies, they knew it, hundreds of times repeated, lie after lie after lie. And then there's the point that Dan also made, it's an aggressive war. An aggressive war actually after Nuremberg, which is where the Germans were tried, is the penultimate crime. It's considered to have within it every other crime, torture, murder, slavery, all of them. It's the penultimate crime, a war of aggression. And we're right in saying that this war is no different than other wars of aggression that have been carried out in the past. So Iraq War is right there. It's right there now. Secondly, and if you want a crime, if you want a clear crime, national security warrantless wiretapping. Here's what the story of that is remarkable. My first case actually in '71 when I went to the center was litigating the national security wiretaps of George Mitchell and not George Mitchell, what was Mitchell's the Attorney General? John Mitchell and Richard Nixon. And we held it unconstitutional in the Supreme Court in '74, '76. And then they passed this law that allows secret warrants to be issued from a special court. It's here in Washington. Windows are all blacked out. It's somewhere in the Justice Department. These guys get together and they issue warrants. After 9/11, the president comes to Congress and he says, hey guys, I need more power to wiretap. And what do? They give it to him. And of course we go crazy and object, this is unconstitutional, it's illegal, you can't do this. But you know, I'm looking in the wrong direction. While he's asking for more power to do it, he doesn't care about what they gave him. He's just wiretapping without a warrant altogether thousands of Americans reading our emails and going forward like that after he's actually gone to Congress. And one of the plaintiffs in one of the lawsuits that has been brought is the Center for Constitutional Rights, because he's supposedly wiretapping anybody who talks to an alleged terrorist. Well, what do we do every day in our work at the center? We talk to the families. We talk to the families of the people at Guantanamo. They're all over the world. We're widely wiretapped. But it's a crime. Every instance is 5 years in jail of an unlawful, illegal wiretap. So if someone says to you, well, it's not a crime what he did in Iraq, it is a crime, but in addition, you also have warrantless wiretapping. And then, of course, torture. You know, Dan, I think, slipped up a little bit, or whoever said, well, if he wants to torture people, he should change the law. You can't change the law about torture. I know Dan didn't mean that. You can't change the law. The law about torture is fundamental human rights law. It cannot be changed. It's what we lawyers have a fancy word. It's called non-derogable. It can't be. You can't torture anybody in any circumstances ever. We have a convention against torture. There's a criminal law about it. There's a criminal law. You can go to jail for life for torturing people. It's called the torture statute. You can be prosecuted by the torture statute. You can also be prosecuted under the war crime statute for violating the Geneva Conventions. The president did both of those. So let there be no doubt, impeachable offenses have been committed. And then we go to the signing statements. If you want to talk about a person becoming a tyrant or a king or whatever term you want to use, it's the signing statements. Of course, it's all the torture memos, it's the national security warrantless wiretapping, all of these taking to the president that I can do whatever I want because I'm president. But the signing statements, of course, are the crucial piece that just in which he openly and publicly says it. And the first and the major one, of course, was the one to the McCain Amendment, the Detainee Treatment Act, when Congress says you can't use cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And what does the president write in the signing statement? Well, I'll do what's necessary for national security, and I don't care what the court tells me, even if the court says I can't do it. If it's necessary for national security, I'll do it. I mean, if you wanted something open and notorious and impeachable, and if you had Congress people with any backbone at all, they would have stood up and they said, impeach this guy now. So that's where we are. And the question is, you know, how do you get there? And all of us have our ways and are working on it, and grassroots activism, and all of us want to push for very good hearings in Congress that actually expose it and bring the American people along with them. But let me say, Congress will not do this without a push from the American people and the public and the people in this room. By the depressing articles I read you from the New York Times today. You can just see it. You know, I read an article by Chalmers Johnson the other day in Harper's. It was really interesting. He says there's two ways you can go when you have an empire like the United States has, and it's a declining empire. You can continue to militarize the entire government, giving more power to the president, and essentially by doing so, destroy democracy at home in the United States. He says that's the way Rome went, and that's the way we're going right now. If you look around in this room and see the people in the orange jumpsuits, that's the way we're going right now. Or you can go another way, and it's not the best example, but it's an empire who, after some struggle, gave up its empire, and that's Britain, and retained some semblance of its democracy. So you have those ways. In the United States, so far, it can still be pulled back, I think, with impeachment from the road it's taken, which is what I call the Greek or the Athens-Roman road toward empire, militarization of everything we know, and essentially dictatorship and tyranny at home. I want to end on really, you know, the quote you all know, but it came up recently when I was talking to Amy Goodman, and she wrote a piece on it. It's, of course, Frederick Douglass's quote about power concedes nothing without a demand. And she wrote an article after I discovered this fact that Frederick Douglass was actually given punishment and whipped in the house on the coast, and I think it's in Virginia, where Maryland, where that Donald Rumsfeld happens to own right now. So the quote, of course, is power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And we know what our demand is. Our demand is to impeach this president now. Yeah.